It's a hot seller's market at the moment, and buyers are frequently paying significantly more than the list price for desirable properties. However, blind bidding means some buyers are paying vastly more for properties than they actually need to. I'm Peter Boscas, and in this video in the Good, Better, Best mini-series, we'll explain how buyers can use a crafty clause in their offers to make them as attractive as possible to the seller without overpaying for the property in the process. Inventory is tight, and there aren't a lot of properties to choose from at the moment. So let's say a buyer finds a perfect home and it's listed at $500,000, but they're willing to pay up to $550,000. There's competition for the property and the buyer wants to be aggressive. Unfortunately, the buyer won't know what their competition is offering, so they essentially have to guess at what their offer price should be to win the competition. But they also want to be careful not to spend more than they have to. So the buyer may decide to offer $550,000, which is the most they are comfortable with. But if the next highest offer was only $510,000, the buyer would have overpaid for the house by $40,000. To avoid that risk of overpaying, the buyer may decide to only offer $525,000. But if their bid loses, they may be very disappointed to find out later that the winning bid was only $530,000, which was well within their comfortable price point. It's a very difficult dilemma for buyers to navigate, carefully balancing the need to be aggressive, but also trying not to hurt themselves in the process by overpaying. But there is a clever mechanism available to buyers to help them avoid this situation, and it's called an escalation clause. The escalation clause is essentially an auto bidding system like you might find on an auction website like eBay. The way it works is pretty simple. The buyer makes an initial offer at a particular price point, which usually is the list price of the property. But then their offer automatically raises to beat their competition up to a certain cap or ceiling that the buyer sets. And basically there are three primary variables to an escalation clause, which are the initial offer price, the offer price cap, and the increment the buyer's offer is raised over their competition. In our previous example, the escalation clause would work like this. The buyer makes an initial offer of $500,000 and sets the cap of the clause to $550,000, which was the maximum price they were comfortable with. And in this example, we'll use $5,000 as the increment over competition to make it simple. If a competing buyer made an offer on this property at $510,000, our example offer would then automatically raise to $515,000, which is that incremental $5,000 over their competition. But if a competing buyer made an offer of $560,000, the example offer would stop at $550,000 because that's the cap that was initially set. The benefit to this system is the buyer can feel confident that they're always a step ahead of their competition as long as it's within their comfort level, but not vastly overpaying for the property. In a future video, we'll discuss the strategy buyers should use to determine their own maximum offer price and comfort level. So if you'd like to learn more, be sure to give us a like, click subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can get notified when the next video is published. Now, obviously, the cap is a very important component of this clause because it ultimately decides how aggressive the buyer's offer is compared to their competition from a pure pricing perspective. However, the increment is just as important as it's what differentiates one offer from another one. If the increment's too low, it likely won't have an impact on the seller's decision. So, for instance, if the increment is only $100, that won't be enough to persuade a seller to accept one offer over another. Let's say one offer ends up being $100 less than an offer with an escalation clause. But if that offer is a cash offer with no other contingencies or risks to the seller, they would still likely go with the lower offer because the $100 wouldn't be enough to offset the risk of the other aspects of the escalating offer. This means that, as a buyer, it's very important for you to self-scout your own offer and aggressiveness. Your agent should be giving you a realistic idea of how strong the other components of your offer are so you can appropriately decide how large of an increment you may need to use to offset some of the weak points of your offer. Now, the number one question buyers have about escalation clauses is what is stopping the listing agent from claiming there was competition up to the maximum cap the buyer set just to squeeze out the highest offer possible? The answer is that the seller has to provide a copy of the competing buyer's documents as evidence as to what terms the competition offered. This way, the buyer can verify there was, in fact, competition up to a certain price point that initiated their escalation clause. It's important to note that because you're showing your hand as a buyer as to how much you're willing to pay for the home, you shouldn't be using an escalation clause unless you're sure there's competition. So the buyer's agent should be having conversations with the listing agent to see if there is competition before submitting the offer. Now, there will be an occasional situation where a listing agent notifies buyers in advance that escalation clauses won't be accepted, but that's not very frequent. And this actually has the possibility of backfiring on the seller because some buyers will offer less than their escalation cap when they're trying to predict how much a property might sell for. In our next video in the GBB series, we'll talk about the various options available for settlement dates and what exactly a rent back is.